What if I told you we could step into a world where dinosaurs were just beginning to take their very first steps? Curl up, dim the lights, and drift with me back. About 252 million years ago, the Earth had just survived the worst mass extinction it had ever known, the Permian catastrophe, when most life was swept away. What followed was a long, strange recovery, a chapter of rebirth called the Triassic Period. This was not yet the world of giant thunder lizards. No, the Triassic was the quiet prelude, a time when dinosaurs were small, scrappy newcomers among many other strange creatures. Imagine a stage reset after disaster, the air still heavy with change, the ground cracking with possibility. It was here, in this ancient crucible, that dinosaurs began their story. Picture it: harsh lands, unusual beasts, and the very first steps of creatures that would one day rule the planet. The Triassic was not gentle, not easy, but it was the beginning of something legendary. So let's journey there together, to a world raw and untamed, where survival was uncertain, but wonder was everywhere. What do you imagine it would feel like, standing in that deep past, watching the very first dinosaurs stride across the Earth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tap like, subscribe, and join me as we set out to explore the dawn of the dinosaur age. Imagine the Earth wearing a single, colossal mask of stone. No scattered continents drifting apart. No oceans dividing lands into cozy pockets. Just one vast, united expanse of rock, stitched together into a giant landmass. That was Pangaea, the great supercontinent of the Triassic period. If the Earth were a stage, then Pangaea was the largest set ever built, an oversized platform upon which evolution would rehearse some of its boldest experiments. To understand Pangaea, picture yourself far above the Triassic Earth, floating as though you were a satellite before satellites were even conceivable. Below you, one massive landform sprawls almost pole to pole, where today you'd see the Americas split from Africa, where Asia stretches far from Australia, and Antarctica sulks at the bottom. In the Triassic, all of them are pressed into one titanic handshake. North met south, without apology. East pressed against west without hesitation. The planet looks strange, but also oddly symmetrical, like a puzzle completed after millions of years of tectonic drifting. Surrounding this gargantuan continent was a single ocean, the Panthalassa. Its name, like a spell whispered across the waves, means all sea. And truly, it was an all-consuming ocean, a water world encircling a stone giant. There were smaller inland seas and gulfs cutting into Pangaea's edges, but nothing compared to the immensity of that global moat. To sail it, if sailing had existed, would have been an epic beyond Odysseus's wildest dreams. No shoreline in sight, no islands offering respite, just weeks or months of waves cresting endlessly, until at last you reached the opposite rim of Pangaea's coast. Now the surface of this vast land was not uniform. Pangaea was no monotonous slab. It breathed, cracked, folded, and shifted under the restless pulse of tectonic energy. Earthquakes rattled across its spine. Volcanoes, like fiery punctuation marks, erupted in scattered arcs. Mountain chains rose not delicately, but abruptly, like jagged teeth biting the sky. Valleys sagged between them, sometimes flooded, sometimes dry. Plains stretched in every direction, so broad that a creature might wander for weeks without ever seeing the shimmer of the sea. If you've ever complained about a long road trip, imagine being a cynodont, a small fur-like reptile mammal, trekking hundreds of miles just to find a riverbank. Pangaea's interior, so far from the oceans, felt like another planet entirely. The sheer size of the landmass meant that the coasts and the heart of Pangaea were worlds apart. Near the edges, rivers braided into deltas, wetlands sprawled where tides met soil, and lush swamps formed habitats rich with amphibians, reptiles, and early archosaurs. Inland, the terrain stretched into wide plateaus and desolate basins, landscapes so vast they seemed infinite. Here the earth whispered, "Walk if you dare, but don't expect to see the horizon change anytime soon." But let us pause for a moment and consider the artistry of this supercontinent. It wasn't just a pile of rock, it was a geologic masterpiece formed by the slow choreography of plate tectonics. Over hundreds of millions of years, smaller continents collided like dancers in a cosmic ballet. Gondwana, Laurasia, and countless microcontinents fused, stitched together by mountain chains, sutured with fault lines. Every collision left scars, ranges that would someday erode into the sediments we now study. But in the Triassic, those ranges were fresh, sharp, and monumental. Imagine peaks new enough to shine, raw cliffs that hadn't yet been worn down by rain or softened by forests. The Earth was flexing its muscles, showing off the raw power of its crust. Wandering through Pangaea, you'd encounter a buffet of environments, not ecosystems as we'd imagine today. No wide grasslands, for grass did not exist yet. No flowering plants to colour the ground. Instead, the land was dressed in conifers, cycads, and strange, spindly ferns. They clung to riverbanks and spread across lowland valleys. Some formed patchy woodlands, others small, stubborn groves. Beyond these, landscapes opened into barren plains, rocky outcrops, and deserts, stretching farther than any eye could trace. The earth itself seemed to whisper jokes. Welcome, traveller, thirsty yet? Good. Keep walking. Water was never far from mind. Rivers carved their way through Pangaea's folds, cutting canyons and depositing sediments in wide alluvial fans. Some ended in great inland basins, forming ephemeral lakes that appeared and vanished like mirages. Imagine standing at the edge of such a lake, its waters reflecting the alien sky, fringed not by reeds but by forests of horsetails, taller than a person. Crocodile-like reptiles lurked near the shallows, waiting for careless prey. Amphibians the size of cars dozed in the muck, occasionally shifting their bulk with a splash that echoed like thunder. These waters were not permanent havens, but they carried life and danger in equal measure. And then there were the marshlands and swamps, especially near the coasts. Here the earth played host to experiments in survival. Trees with tough, needle-like leaves clawed skyward. Strange reptiles prowled the mud. Early insects buzzed in dense clouds, their wings catching sunlight in shimmering flashes. The air itself seemed thick, full of sound and the buzzing of wings, the calls of creatures testing new voices, the splash of predators making sudden lunges. If the open plains felt like silence, these wetlands felt like cacophony. Volcanoes added their own drama to this landscape. At times they poured out vast sheets of basalt, black rock still steaming as it cooled, rewriting the ground beneath the feet of wandering creatures. Ash-darkened skies fell into rivers and painted entire valleys grey. But life was persistent. Plants sprouted in the cracks. Small animals scurried across hardened lava, claiming the land as soon as it stabilized. The Earth's violence was matched by its resilience, a paradox that defined Pangaea. The mountains, meanwhile, stood as the backbone of this supercontinent. Some ranges towered high, catching clouds and sending meltwater cascading into streams. Others were ancient and eroded, long-worn veterans of earlier collisions, their bones exposed to the sun. Traversing these ranges was no small task. Imagine a group of early dinosaurs, small and bird-like, weaving through the slopes, scrambling over scree, darting into forest for cover. They were not yet the giants of the later Jurassic. They were survivors, opportunists, scurrying across a stage that seemed almost too vast for them. If you continued to wander, you might stumble into canyons, carved by relentless rivers. The walls would reveal layers of red and orange rock, sediments laid down in rhythmic patterns, telling silent stories of floods and droughts, of land reshaped again and again. These canyons were more than scars. They were archives, preserving the secrets of a restless earth. Imagine dipping your hand into their sands, holding grains that were already millions of years old, each a survivor of journeys through rivers and winds, now gathered into cliffs that would stand for millions more. And through all this stretched Pangaea's endless coastlines. Imagine standing at the shore of Panthalassa. Before you, an ocean so wide you could not fathom its farthest edge. Waves thundered, storms churned, and sea reptiles, ichthyosaurs sleek as dolphins, not yet whales, but hinting at what whales would one day become, leapt from the water. Giant ammonites, coiled shells shimmering with iridescence, floated like alien balloons beneath the waves. The coast was a boundary, but also a meeting place, where the vast stone of Pangaea met the endless water of Panthalassa. The contrast was dramatic, elemental. Now imagine traveling inland again, step after step, mile after mile, until the sound of the ocean fades. At first, rivers and forests accompany you, then shrubs, then scrub, then stretches of stone and sand. The land opens into plains that seem without end. Shadows of mountains rise faintly in the distance, but between them and you lies a sea of rock and silence. This was the paradox of Pangaea, too large to tame, too unified to fragment into cozy corners. A creature living at its center might never glimpse the ocean, never know the edges of its world. For them, the horizon was destiny, always present, never reached. The supercontinent shaped more than landscapes. It shaped possibility. By merging habitats into one continuous landmass, it allowed animals to spread far and wide. Dinosaurs, early mammals, reptiles, amphibians, all shared this grand stage. Species that might have remained isolated in smaller continents now mingled, competed, and adapted. It was as though Earth had thrown all its evolutionary dice onto a single board, letting chance and struggle decide the winners. And yet, despite this vastness, the world was fragile. Pangaea was restless, never still. Cracks formed, rifts opened, water seeped into faults, and the first hints of division stirred in the crust. Though it would remain intact through the Triassic, the seeds of its eventual breakup into the continents we know today were already germinating. The land itself seemed to sense its impermanence. A giant, yes, but a giant that would one day fall apart. Still during the Triassic, Pangaea was unchallenged. It was the colossus of Earth's history, unmatched in scale, a union of nearly all land under one continental crown. To walk across it was to walk across an entire era. To live upon it was to live upon the raw bones of the earth. It was desolate and abundant, dangerous and full of promise, a paradoxical playground for life. If the Triassic was the dawn of dinosaurs, then Pangaea was the canvas upon which their first sketches were drawn. A single, enormous continent, wrapped in a single endless ocean. Mountains and plains, deserts and swamps, rivers and volcanoes, all stitched together into one sprawling mosaic. The earth seemed to declare with both humor and menace, "Here is my masterpiece. Survive if you can." So when you picture this world, let your imagination sprawl wide. Picture the stone giant of Pangaea, wrapped in the blue cloak of Panthalassa. Picture the restless crust shifting beneath clawed feet. Picture rivers vanishing into basins, mountains biting into clouds, forests whispering in the wind, and above all, picture the stage itself, not yet filled with thunderous giants, but already alive with possibility. For the Triassic world was not merely a prelude to dinosaurs, it was a testament to Earth's ability to unite, to create vastness, to whisper both challenge and invitation. Welcome to Pangaea, traveler. The stage is set, the play has only just begun. If Earth were ever to host a grand sauna session, the Triassic period would be it. Step into this world, and the first thing you'd feel is the heat, thick, unrelenting. A planetary oven cranked between 25 and 40 degrees Celsius on average, with bursts of even hotter extremes. Forget glaciers, forget snowy caps gleaming at the poles during the Triassic. Ice was nowhere to be found. This was an Earth without frost. A world stripped of white, glowing instead in shades of ochre, red, and gold. The engine behind this relentless warmth was the atmosphere itself. Carbon dioxide levels were high, a thick invisible blanket trapping sunlight and holding it close. If you could breathe it in, though you wouldn't want to, you'd notice that the air felt heavy, richer in greenhouse gases than the oxygen-rich mix we enjoy today. Imagine every exhale you make multiplied into the sky 10,000 times over, the world's thermostat jammed at trop. The Triassic atmosphere whispered a promise and a warning, comfortable only if you like things steamy. Across the planet, this hot breath of Earth made itself known. In every corner, the absence of polar ice meant no frozen reservoirs to balance temperatures. Oceans and land basked in sunlight without interruption. The poles, which in our modern world give us icy anchors that cool ocean currents and regulate winds, were instead greenish stretches warmed like the rest. You could, in theory, walk to the poles and still find yourself sweating muttering, "This doesn't feel very north or south." Inland, the story was harsher. Rain was a rare guest in the vast interiors of the great landmass. Imagine trekking through a terrain that stretched for hundreds of kilometers without the mercy of clouds. Day after day, the sky blazed blue and merciless, the sun standing like an overseer above a scorched stage. Rivers dwindled into trickles, lakes dried into salt-crusted basins. The land was parched, the air dry, and winds carried dust in great sighs across plains and plateaus. It was not just dry, it was bone dry, the kind of dryness where your lips crack just thinking about it. Yet, where land met the margins, the tale flipped. Along the coasts and lowlands, moisture gathered. Here, storms brewed with drama, rains fell in bursts, and wetlands thrived. One might imagine amphibians sighing in relief as sudden downpours filled their habitats, crocodile-like reptiles grinning with toothy delight as muddy rivers rose again. It wasn't gentle rain, though. The Triassic often delivered water with theatrical flair, flash floods, sweeping through valleys, sudden torrents that could reshape the land overnight. Earth seemed to chuckle. You wanted water? Fine. Take it all at once. This contrast, searing drought inland, drenching storms near the edges, gave the Triassic its split personality. A world both starved and drowned, both barren and lush, depending on where you happen to stand. A cynodont sniffing the parched dust of an interior plain lived in a universe entirely different from an ichthyosaur basking in coastal humidity. Same planet, wildly different realities. Now let's return to the numbers, those quiet but powerful markers of Earth's condition. Average surface temperatures between 25 and 40 degrees Celsius sound tolerable on paper, perhaps even pleasant compared to today's sweltering summer afternoons. But remember, these were averages, extremes spiked higher, and nights offered little reprieve. The air hung thick and warm long after sunset, the rocks themselves radiating the heat they had soaked up during the day. If you think of today's deserts, where midday heat scorches and twilight brings sudden chill, the Triassic was different. Less forgiving swings, more consistent burning. Why such stability and warmth? One culprit was the sheer abundance of carbon dioxide. In the Triassic, carbon dioxide concentrations may have been 5 times higher than our modern pre-industrial levels. The Earth was essentially living in a greenhouse, with the windows shut tight. Volcanoes spewed gas, rocks released it through slow chemical weathering, and the balance tipped firmly toward heat retention. Plants helped, of course, capturing carbon as they grew, but they were not yet evolved into the dense forests and flowering carpets we know today. Conifers, cycads, and ferns held their ground, but their appetite for carbon couldn't keep pace with the exhalations of a restless planet. The absence of ice mattered too. Without polar ice caps to reflect sunlight back into space, more heat was absorbed by dark oceans and rocky surfaces. This is the albedo effect, or in plain words, the Earth's mirror was gone. Imagine standing in front of a giant bonfire with a reflective shield that suddenly vanishes. You'd feel the flames directly, more intensely. That's what the Triassic planet endured every day, every season. Yet, there was also opportunity in this sweltering chaos. Warmth meant energy, and energy meant potential for life to experiment. Evolution thrives on challenge, and the hot, dry Triassic provided it in abundance. Creatures had to adapt to heat tolerance, conserving water, to surviving in environments where rain might not fall for months or even years. Some huddled near rivers and wetlands, others became nomads, wandering in search of sustenance. Seeds and spores toughened, shells thickened, behaviors shifted. The climate was not gentle, but it was generative. It forged resilience. Humor lives even in this furnace, if you know where to look. Picture an early dinosaur, no taller than a human, scurrying across a baked plain, every step like running over a frying pan. If it could think like us, it might mutter, "Whose idea was it to invent legs in this climate? Couldn't we have developed air conditioning first?" Amphibians, basking in mud puddles, might croak irritably when the puddle evaporated by noon, leaving them blinking in disbelief. Really? That was our entire living room. And yet, despite the challenges, the Triassic sky was often dazzling. Without polar ice sheets, sea levels were relatively high, and moisture cycles near the coasts created towering clouds. Lightning storms cracked the heavens, thunder echoed across plains, and rainbows stretched in impossible arches after brief but violent downpours. Inland, dust storms painted the horizon red and orange, while sunsets burned spectacularly through hazy skies, heavy with carbon dioxide. If you could stand there, squinting against the brilliance, you might think, this is both terrifying and breathtaking. A furnace, yes, but one painted in vivid strokes. This furnace, Earth reshaped time itself. Seasons were long, intense, and punishing. Regions near the equator roasted under near-constant heat. Higher latitudes, though cooler, were still warmer than today's temperate zones. Animals didn't migrate casually. They had to master timing, sensing when rains would return or when waterholes would vanish. Plants clung to niches, their roots probing deep for any trace of moisture. Their structures adapted for survival rather than showy abundance. The Triassic climate also reshaped geology. With little ice or glacial erosion, landscapes preserved the scars of tectonic upheaval. Rivers etched canyons into red rock. Deserts spread seas of sand, dunes rolling in waves as winds howled. Sediments recorded rhythmic cycles of drought and flood, written in layers of color. The earth was keeping its diary in stripes of stone. This year dust, this year water, this year dust again. Even at its poles, Earth refused to freeze. Imagine standing at what we call today Antarctica during the Triassic. You would not find a barren ice desert, but forests of conifers, swaying gently in warm breezes, their needles catching the endless summer light. Dinosaurs could wander there without fear of frostbite, perhaps more annoyed by mosquitoes than by cold. Earth was uniform in its warmth, the contrast between equator and pole muted, as though the planet had decided, let's keep things consistently hot everywhere, less confusing that way. But perhaps the most astonishing quality of this climate was its persistence. For millions of years, Earth held steady in this greenhouse state. There were fluctuations, of course. Volcanic eruptions darkening skies, temporarily, tectonic movements, nudging seas and air currents. But overall, the Triassic was dominated by heat and aridity. It was stability through intensity, a climate that refused moderation. To call it hostile is not to dismiss its beauty. The Triassic furnace was alive with paradoxes. Heat baked the interiors, yet life clung stubbornly to river valleys. Rain avoided the heartlands, yet coastal storms sculpted landscapes with sudden ferocity. No snow softened mountains, but green forests brushed their slopes. Amphibians, reptiles, early mammals, and the first true dinosaurs all endured these extremes, carving out their evolutionary stories in the heat. So when you picture this climate, don't imagine a uniform desert. Imagine instead a patchwork quilt of extremes. Vast dry interiors, fringed with storm-soaked edges, lands without snow, skies without mercy, air thick with heat. Imagine breathing in that dense atmosphere, squinting against sunrises that painted the world red, sweating under a sky that refused to relent. This was the Triassic world, a planetary kiln, a crucible, a test. And Earth, ever the mischievous host, seemed to chuckle. Bring a fan, traveler. No snow awaits you here, only heat, dust, and the promise of survival if you're clever enough. If the land of the Triassic was a furnace of stone, the ocean was its shimmering counterpart, an endless body of water, stretching farther than the imagination dared. This was Panthalassa, the global ocean, the sole marine giant of the Triassic world. To look upon it was to gaze into infinity, horizon folding into horizon, sky pressed against sea in a seamless curve. There were no neat boundaries, no familiar patchwork of smaller oceans. There was only one, vast, warm, alive. Slip into its waters gently, for surprises lurk beneath, and you would notice first the warmth. Panthalassa was no icy abyss. Its waters glowed with heat carried by the sun, comfortable in the shallows, inviting in the upper layers, though treacherous in their hidden depths. This was not a sea of chilling currents and frozen poles. It was a warm bath stretched across the face of the planet. If the continents formed the bones of the earth, then Panthalassa was its blood, circulating, carrying, nourishing. The shallows near coasts and submerged plateaus teemed with nutrients. Rivers and volcanic vents fed minerals into the water, and plankton bloomed in clouds, invisible but essential. These microscopic drifters were the foundation of life, the quiet architects of survival, transforming sunlight and minerals into food for everything larger. If you could drift with them magnified to the scale of an ammonite's eye, you would find them swirling in golden haze, a living soup, each cell a jewel of energy, and where there is food, there is motion. Schools of ray-finned fish darted in quicksilver flashes, their bodies slim, agile, designed for speed. They were the new rulers of the small things, a lineage that had begun humbly in earlier ages but now found freedom in Panthalassa's expanses. Scales glittered in the light like scattered coins, fins flickered like ribbons, predators chased them, jaws snapping, and they twisted, turned, vanished into shifting patterns. The ocean was never still. It pulsed with life. Among the most enchanting of Panthalassa's residents were the ammonites. Picture them shells coiled in perfect spirals, ridged with elegant patterns, floating like celestial ornaments in a blue cathedral. They were cephalopods, cousins of squids and octopuses, their soft bodies hidden inside protective chambers of calcium carbonate. Tentacles sprouted outward, exploring, grasping, capturing. They drifted, they swam, they hunted tiny prey, and in their movements was both grace and strategy. Some ammonites were as small as coins, others the size of dinner plates, and still others would one day reach the width of cartwheels. Their shells were more than protection. They were poetry written in curves, mathematics shaped by evolution. Looking at them, you might imagine the earth itself doodling spirals in the margins of creation, as if to say life should have a little flourish. Yet, beauty was never safe in the Triassic seas, for where ammonites drifted, predators soon followed. Enter the first great marine reptiles, pioneers of a new way of life. Reptiles who had left the land to embrace the water. Among them were the ichthyosaurs, whose bodies resembled streamlined dolphins. Their snouts were long, their eyes enormous, their speed remarkable. They sliced through schools of fish with practiced precision, snapping up prey with needle-toothed jaws. If you watched from below, their silhouettes against the sun would have seemed like shadows of missiles, the promise of sudden death for any creature too slow. Alongside them swam the nothosaurs, semi-aquatic hunters, with slender bodies and paddle-like limbs. They had not yet fully committed to the sea. Some could still haul themselves onto land, but in the water they were sleek and efficient, ambushing prey with surprising agility. Then came the placodonts, oddities with blunt teeth for crushing shells. Imagine a reptile with a taste for armored snacks, swimming steadily, jaws grinding ammonites and mollusks with satisfaction. These were the connoisseurs of the Panthalassan buffet. Deeper down, the waters grew mysterious, layered in gradients of light and shadow. Sunlight filtered only so far, fading into twilight, then blackness. Few dared the abyss, for oxygen was scarcer, pressure greater, and predators stranger. But life persisted even here. Giant sharks patrolled, their bodies silent torpedoes in the gloom. Cartilaginous skeletons gave them speed and stealth, while rows of teeth promised merciless efficiency. Small fish glimmered with bioluminescence, flickering like living lanterns in the dark. The deep ocean was no less alive than the shallows. It was simply more secretive, but it was in the reefs and coastal platforms where life exploded with extravagance. Early corals and sponges built structures fragile compared to later reefs, yet still teeming with inhabitants. Crustaceans scuttled, echinoderms crept, and fish darted in and out like nervous actors on a crowded stage. The water shimmered with diversity, each niche filled, each layer buzzing. The reefs were the Triassic equivalent of bustling cities, chaotic, vibrant, unpredictable. If the open ocean was a vast highway, the reefs were its marketplaces. To float above Panthalassa was to see contrasts painted in liquid strokes. Some regions glowed turquoise and shallow, warm lagoons cradled by underwater ridges. Others stretched into endless blue, a canvas without features, the monotony broken only by the dart of a predator or the rise of a fin. And in the stormy stretches, waves crashed with fury. Winds sculpted whitecaps, and spray leapt into the sky as if to taste the heavens. The ocean was not one mood, but many, a living personality, mercurial, immense. Scientists now speak of its nutrients, its currents, its chemistry, but if you were there, in that moment of deep time, you would not think in terms of data. You would feel it, the water wrapping around you, dense with unseen life. The pull of tides beneath your feet, the salt tang filling your lungs if you dared to breathe the spray. The sound not silence, but a symphony of clicks, splashes and roars. The sea was a body, and you were a visitor in its bloodstream. And the humor of it, yes, even oceans have jokes, was that survival often meant not being ridiculous. Imagine an ammonite floating serenely, tentacles waving, when a nothosaur lunges, gone in an instant, or a school of fish dashing together for safety, only to form the perfect bite-sized cluster for an ichthyosaur. Nature's punchlines could be brutal, but they were always inventive. In this watery world, evolution's experiments were bold. Reptiles reinvented themselves as swimmers. Fish diversified into forms both sleek and strange. Mollusks built shells of extravagant design, spirals that defied simplicity, and tiny plankton, unseen by the giants, quietly wrote the rules of survival by powering the entire food chain. From the invisible to the immense, Panthalassa carried all of them, nourished all of them, challenged all of them. If you swam here, your senses would be overwhelmed. The heat of the water, the glitter of scales, the flash of shells, the looming shadows of predators. Every ripple was alive with intent, every current a messenger of change, and yet there was serenity too. Drifting with the plankton, watching shafts of sunlight pierce the surface, listening to the muted thrum of waves. It would feel like floating inside a dream. Panthalassa was not gentle, but it was generous. It gave life a stage of unimaginable size. It tested, it refined, it inspired. The ammonites curled tighter, the fish swam faster, the reptiles dove deeper. Each adaptation was a line in a poem written in salt water. Each extinction, a dramatic pause. Each survival, a stanza that would carry forward into the Jurassic and beyond. So when you picture this ocean, do not see emptiness. See abundance stretched across infinity. See ammonites drifting like cosmic spirals. See ray-finned fish glittering like liquid arrows. See ichthyosaurs slicing the water with merciless grace. See notiosaurs prowling the shallows, platodonts crunching shells, sharks ruling the depths. See plankton weaving invisible webs of sustenance. And above it all, imagine Earth itself leaning close to whisper, "Swim, my children. My sea is vast, my depths are rich. But beware, wonder and danger are never far apart." Panthalassa was the heart of the Triassic, the living ocean that fed, sheltered, and tested the creatures of its time. Warm, shallow in places, deep and mysterious in others, it was a crucible of evolution, a shimmering expanse where beauty and brutality swam side by side, a place where the future of marine life was forged. One scale, one shell, one bite at a time. Step onto the land of the Triassic, and you would not mistake it for home. This was not a world of rolling meadows or familiar forests, not a place of gentle rivers winding past shaded groves. Instead, the continents of this era unfurled like a vast, unfinished canvas, painted with bold, severe strokes, deserts that stretched for unimaginable distances, swamps that steamed and buzzed, forests that looked thin and stubborn, clinging to survival with needle and frond. The earth was experimenting, and the palette leaned toward extremes. Begin with the deserts. Imagine walking inland, across the immense heart of the supercontinent, and finding yourself in landscapes so broad they swallowed thought itself. Here, sand and stone were the rulers. Dunes rolled endlessly, sculpted by hot winds that never seemed to rest. From horizon to horizon, the view was variations on a theme of emptiness. Ochre ridges, red plains, salt pans shimmering in the glare. Rain was an infrequent visitor. When clouds did form, they were more likely to tease than deliver. Travelers in such a land might tilt their heads hopefully at a distant haze, only to find the storm dissolving into dust before the first drop could fall. The earth seemed to whisper, thirst is the price of wandering here. Temperatures soared, the ground baked, and the silence of the interior was broken only by the sigh of wind pushing sand from one dune to another. If you've ever stood in a desert today and thought it lonely, imagine multiplying that sensation 100-fold. The Triassic deserts were not only vast, but largely uninterrupted. Without grasses, without flowering plants, without the busy insect hum we now associate with arid landscapes, they felt almost alien in their simplicity. There was life, of course, but scattered, hidden, adapted. The desert itself was the main character. And yet, even in this apparent emptiness, beauty existed. At sunrise, the dunes blushed crimson as the low sun lit their crests. At noon, heat shimmered in mirages, distant rippling pools that mocked the eye. At sunset, shadows stretched for miles, painting the sand in stripes of purple and gold. The desert was harsh, but it was also theatrical. It knew how to stage a show. Now step outward, toward the coasts, and the story shifts. Where land dipped low and water lingered, swamps and wetlands spread like living counterpoints to the dryness of the interior. Here the air grew thick, heavy with moisture, and the sweet rot of vegetation. Mud squelched beneath your feet. Reeds and horsetails rose in dense stands, and the still pools reflected tangled canopies above. The wetlands were noisy, chaotic, brimming with the sounds of buzzing, splashing, croaking, and the occasional thunderclap of rain. If the desert was silence, the swamp was conversation. Plants thrived where water was abundant, and their green spread outward in mats and thickets. Streams meandered through muddy channels, carrying silt that stained the water brown. Pools opened suddenly among the vegetation, some shallow, some bottomless, their surfaces broken by ripples that hinted at unseen movements beneath. To walk here was to feel the land resist you every step, a negotiation with mud, every path winding around waterlogged obstacle, and always the scent of decay, plants dying, plants growing, a cycle never still. Swamps had their own kind of humor. Imagine trying to find firm ground only to discover it sinking slowly beneath your weight. Imagine searching for a clear view only to have reeds close in again. The swamp seemed to chuckle at intruders. You thought dry land would save you. Try your luck in my mud. Yet, for all their inconvenience, these wetlands were rich with energy, reservoirs of life in a world otherwise prone to drought. They were the lungs of the Triassic landscape, exhaling humidity, supporting abundance. Beyond deserts and swamps lay the forests, though forest may be too generous a word by modern standards. These were not thick jungles or broadleaf expanses. They were sparse, standoffish, trees scattered across the land like solitary sentinels. Conifers rose with needle-clad branches, tough and efficient, designed not for beauty but for survival in dry conditions. Ferns spread in patches, their fronds catching sunlight in delicate fans. Cycads stood stout and armored, their crowns of leaves like stiff parasols. Together they formed a green tapestry stretched thin across the land, more like a sketch than a painting. In some places the trees clustered more densely, forming woodlands along rivers or valleys where moisture lingered. In others they appeared as lonely groves, separated by kilometers of bare soil or stone. These forests did not promise shade so much as occasional relief. The earth seemed to mutter, "Here is a tree, don't expect another for a while." For creatures wandering in the heat, these patches of vegetation were both sanctuary and oasis. The ground beneath these forests was unlike the thick, leafy carpets we know today. Without grasses, the soil was often bare, exposed, or covered only with low mats of ferns and moss. Rain, when it came, eroded quickly, carving rivulets and gullies, leaving behind raw earth. The roots of trees clung hard, but they were fewer, shallower. Walking through such a forest, you might feel the land itself under your feet, less cushioned, more immediate. And what of the atmosphere above these forests? Dryness reigned, but the canopy still reached upward, catching light, rustling in winds that carried dust as often as moisture. Fires sometimes swept through, ignited by lightning, racing across dry vegetation before fading again. These fires were part of the rhythm of the land, reminders that even in sparse forests, the cycle of destruction and renewal never ceased. Taken together, the Triassic continents were a study in contrasts. Interior deserts baked under relentless suns, coastal swamps steamed with humidity, sparse forests dotted the land, bridging the gap between extremes. It was a patchwork quilt, stitched not with gentle gradients but with abrupt transitions. Walk 100 kilometers, and the world could change entirely, from silence to cacophony, from dryness to mud, from emptiness to green. And through it all, the earth carried a kind of wry humor. It offered no middle ground, no easy comforts. Instead, it challenged every inhabitant with extremes, as if saying, adapt or vanish. This was not cruelty, but opportunity. Harshness forced innovation. Scarcity demanded resilience. Every desert, every swamp, every forest was a crucible where survival was tested. Still, for all its severity, the Triassic land was mesmerizing. Picture standing at the edge of a desert at dusk, the last rays of sunlight painting the dunes in molten colors. Picture slogging through a swamp as dragonflies larger than your hand skim the surface of the water. Picture pausing beneath a lone conifer, its needles whispering in the wind, its shadow stretching long across the bare ground. These were not friendly landscapes, but they were unforgettable. They pressed themselves into the memory of Earth, recorded in sediments, in fossils, in the very stones we dig up today. To modern eyes, the Triassic continents would seem stark, even alien. But to the Earth, they were simply another experiment, another stage in its long story of change. Deserts showed how vast land could endure without water. Swamps showed how abundance could thrive when moisture was plentiful. Forests showed how plants could adapt, sparse yet persistent, to conditions far from gentle. The Triassic continents whispered a lesson. Still relevant, balance is not always the rule. Sometimes extremes define the world. Sometimes survival means not comfort, but endurance. And sometimes in the midst of harshness, beauty emerges, not lush, not soft, but austere, bold, unforgettable. So when you imagine the land of the Triassic, let it unfold in contrasts. See the deserts, red and endless, sighing with dust. See the swamps, wet and noisy, thick with mud and growth. See the forests, sparse and stoic, each tree a testament to resilience. And listen for the earth's wry voice beneath it all. Amused and unhurried, welcome traveller. Shade is scarce, mud is abundant, and water is never where you want it. Good luck finding a campsite. Step into the Triassic world and listen closely, for the land is not silent. Beneath the blazing sun, in the shadows of sparse forests and across mud-slick swamps, in the shallows of rivers and the buzzing air above them, life has returned. Only a few million years before, the Earth had been emptied in the greatest extinction it had ever endured, the Permian catastrophe, a crisis so severe it nearly erased the slate of existence entirely. Yet, here we are, in the Triassic, and the slate is not empty after all. It is scribbled again with creatures strange and new, survivors who adapted, opportunists who rose, and innovators who reshaped the rules. The age is experimental, restless, buzzing with possibility. The Triassic is not yet the reign of dinosaurs that will come later, but already the stage is filling with actors. The most dramatic of these were the early reptiles, the Rauisuchians. Even the name has a kind of growl in it, as if the syllables themselves were made of teeth. These were not small, timid animals, picture crocodile-like predators, but magnified, upright, striding on powerful limbs. They were the bruisers of the Triassic, apex hunters prowling across plains and forests, their jaws lined with curved teeth sharp enough to leave permanent reminders on any creature unlucky enough to cross them. Some reached lengths of 6 to 8 meters, towering over the smaller animals that scurried beneath. With skulls built for power and tails like whips, they ruled with confidence. If you ever stumbled into their path, you would not stop to admire the anatomy. You would sprint, hoping their interest was short-lived. The earth in its dry humor might lean in to whisper, "Don't tease the Rauisuchians. Those jaws are not forgiving." But these rulers were not permanent monarchs. Their dynasty was a brief one in the grand sweep of time. Still, for the length of the Triassic, they were terror and shadow, the predators that shape the behavior of everything else. It is easy to imagine their silhouettes at dusk, backlit by the crimson sky, heads swaying as they scanned the land, tails dragging slow arcs in the dust. They were the embodiment of resilience after extinction, predators rebuilt from the broken fragments of earlier lineages. Yet, predators alone do not make an ecosystem. Turn your gaze to the waters and you find the amphibians, once the mighty rulers of Earth during the Carboniferous and Permian, now diminished. They had been giants once. Labyrinthodonts, sprawling, long-bodied creatures the size of cars. In the Triassic, their empire had shrunk. Some still lingered in rivers and swamps, holding on to the niches they could still command. Their thick skulls, flat bodies, and gaping jaws made them formidable ambush hunters, lurking beneath murky water until an unsuspecting fish or reptile wandered too close. Yet their age of dominance was fading. Drier lands, hotter climates, and new competitors made their hold tenuous. They were still present, still impressive, but you could almost sense time moving against them. Their voices croaked through the night, but with an edge of melancholy, as if they knew their kingdom was slipping away. Where the amphibians waned, other groups surged. The air above the wetlands and forests hummed with the wings of insects. They were not a minor detail of the Triassic world. They were everywhere. Dragonflies zipped through humid air, their wings catching sunlight in glints of gold and silver. Beetles scuttled across bark and soil, armored tanks of miniature design, cockroaches resilient as ever, survived happily, unbothered by extinctions or heat. Flies, true masters of annoyance, emerged in diversity, and in the canopies, cicadas whined, their songs vibrating through the branches. The insects of the Triassic were not only abundant, but inventive. Mouthparts evolved into new shapes, piercing, chewing, siphoning. Some were pollinators before flowering plants even existed, busily visiting cycads and seed ferns, carrying pollen clumsily but effectively. Others were recyclers, breaking down decaying vegetation and enriching soils. Still others were predators themselves, ambushing smaller arthropods with jaws designed for precision. The buzzing, the crawling, the fluttering, it was a constant backdrop to the Triassic soundtrack. If deserts were quiet, insects refused to be. They were the static electricity of life, humming, unrelenting. If you could pause to ask Earth itself about them, perhaps it would laugh and say, "Yes, I nearly erased everything, but I forgot to include the beetles." They never take a hint. Beneath this aerial ballet stood the plants, the silent architects of the Triassic land. After the Permian extinction, the plant world had been rearranged, its dominion reshaped. Now in this warmer, drier world, ferns and conifers stepped forward as the main character. The ferns, ancient survivors, blanketed moist areas with fronds that uncurled like green scrolls. They were opportunists, sprouting quickly in disturbed ground, filling in after floods, after fires, after landslides. Their spores drifted on the wind, colonizing bare patches with ease. Ferns were not majestic, not towering, but they were everywhere. They whispered resilience with every frond, persistence with every spore. In their delicate leaves was the memory of Earth's oldest forests, carried forward into a harsher age. The conifers, by contrast, were architects of ambition. They rose taller, their needle-like leaves built for water conservation, their seeds encased in cones, armored for survival. In the dry air of the Triassic, these adaptations gave them the edge. They could stand where others wilted. Their trunks climbed into the sky, sparse but steady, casting long shadows across the bare ground. They were stoic, patient, enduring. If the ferns were sprinters, the conifers were marathoners, rooted in determination. Their forests were thin but vital, oases of shade and stability in a land that demanded toughness. Cycads also played their role, squat and armored, their stiff leaves radiating outward like crowns. They were odd, almost prehistoric caricatures of palms, but they thrived. Their roots harbored symbiotic bacteria that fixed nitrogen, giving them independence in poor soils. They were stubborn survivors, rooted against adversity, adding texture to the Triassic landscapes. Together, these plants did more than survive. They shaped the world for others. Their roots stabilized soils, Their leaves shaded ground, their presence offered refuge and food. They turned extremes into habitable niches, and in their quiet, persistent growth, they prepared the stage for future dominions. It is easy to think of the Triassic as barren, but it was not barren. It was transitional. Life was not lush in the sense of later ages, but it was inventive, adaptive, persistent. Each group of organisms carved its place with grit and creativity. The Rauisuchians strode as hunters, amphibians lingered as echoes of an older time. Insects filled the air with restless motion. Ferns, conifers, and cycads rooted the land with resilience. It was a world half empty compared to what came before, yet half full compared to what would follow. And through all this ran a thread of excitement. The earth was not static. It was restless, humming with possibility. If you could stand there, on a Triassic plain, and look out across the horizon, you would see not just life as it was, but life in the act of becoming. Every insect wing beat, every fern spore, every reptile stride was a note in a larger song, the melody of recovery after catastrophe. The planet was daring its inhabitants. Survive, adapt, innovate. Show me what you can do. Humor sparkled even in the severity. Picture a beetle clambering over a conifer cone, slipping, landing on its back, and scrambling with absurd legs to right itself. Picture a Rauisuchian lounging in the heat, jaws half open, looking every bit the terrifying predator, but internally groaning, "Too hot to hunt. Wake me when something walks into my mouth." Picture a cycad, squat and armored, as if muttering, "You think I look funny now? Wait until you see me still standing here in 2,000 million years." This was the character of Triassic life, determined, quirky, fierce, stubborn. No single group held absolute dominion. Instead, the Earth felt like a crowded marketplace of experiments, some destined to vanish, others to explode into future greatness. It is tempting to look back, with hindsight, and measure these creatures only by what they led to: the rise of dinosaurs, the evolution of mammals, the eventual flourishing of flowering plants. But in their own time, they were complete, complex, and vital. The Rauisuchians were not proto-predators, they were kings of their age. The amphibians were not leftovers, they were still formidable. The insects were not background players, they were the humming network of energy itself. The ferns and conifers were not primitive plants, they were architects of survival. So imagine walking through this world, the sand crunches beneath your feet, and the sun beats down ahead. A Rauisuchian watches from a ridge, still as stone, eyes bright with calculation. You turn away and the air hums with insects, dragonflies darting, cicadas buzzing. You brush past a grove of cycads, their stiff leaves rattling like dry fans. Beneath them, ferns unfurl in green spirals, delicate yet tenacious. In the distance, an amphibian splashes, its heavy body disturbing the still water of a swampy pool. You inhale, and the scent is resin, dust, and life. The Triassic whispers in that moment, "This is my recovery, my experiment. I burned much of what was before, but from the ashes, I craft anew. These creatures are my first draft of the future. Watch closely. Some will vanish, some will endure, and some will transform the world." This is the story of Triassic. Life not yet the grand dominance of dinosaurs, not yet the flowering of forests, but a bold and messy recovery, full of teeth, wings, spores, and stubborn green. It was the Earth in transition, alive with both fragility and ferocity. And if you listen closely enough, through the buzz of insects and the rumble of reptiles, you might hear the Earth chuckle, quietly amused at its own handiwork. "I told you to survive. Look at you. You did, and the best is still to come." Every great dynasty begins with whispers, not thunder. The giants of the Jurassic and Cretaceous, the towering sauropods, the roaring predators, the horned and plated wonders, did not appear out of nowhere. They began as shadows in the Triassic, as fragile experiments on a harsh stage. And if you wish to trace their lineage, to see the spark that ignited the age of dinosaurs, you must look not at the titans, but at the quick, bird-like shadows that scurried through the Triassic heat. These were the early archosaurs, nimble, modest, but destined for greatness. The story begins with survivors. After the Permian extinction, the Earth was a forge, a crucible that tested every lineage. Among the reptiles that endured were the archosaurs, ruling reptiles as we now call them. They were a broad clan, cousins to crocodiles on one branch, ancestors of dinosaurs and birds on another. Within them lay the seeds of extraordinary possibility. Most of them at first were not impressive in size. They were quick-footed creatures, light of build, their bodies tuned not for brute force but for agility. Where Rauisuchians lumbered like tanks and amphibians clung to old swamps, these little archosaurs darted, sprinted, and adapted to niches that demanded speed. One such figure was Lagosuchus, a creature whose very name means rabbit crocodile. Imagine something no taller than your knee, weighing perhaps as much as a house cat, and standing on elongated hind limbs that gave it the look of a delicate runner. Its forelimbs were shorter, suggesting that it relied more and more on bipedal strides. Its tail balanced its movements, counterweight to each bounding step, and it ran. That was its superpower. In a world of lumbering predators and sluggish prey, Lagosuchus and its kin could sprint. They were the quicksilver of their age, shadows slipping across the sand before jaws could snap shut. It is easy to overlook such a creature. In a fossil bed, its bones are fine, fragile, scattered, a few centimeters of tibia here, a jaw fragment there, nothing like the monumental bones of later dinosaurs. Yet within those delicate fossils lies revolution. Such as shows the beginnings of what would define dinosaurs. Upright posture, balanced gait, the mechanics of endurance, where most reptiles sprawled low, bellies brushing the ground. Archosaurs like Lagosuchus stood tall on pillar-like legs, their hips restructured for strength and mobility. This was a reimagining of movement itself. Evolution was not just tinkering with teeth or scales, it was reinventing locomotion. Why did this matter? Because posture is power. Sprawling reptiles, like modern lizards, waste energy in lateral wriggles. Their lungs compress as they move, limiting stamina. They can sprint, yes, but briefly. Archosaurs with upright postures broke that limit by holding their bodies above the ground, legs swinging forward and back, rather than out to the side. They could breathe and run simultaneously. Stamina was theirs. In a world where heat baked the land and predators lurked, the ability to run farther, longer, faster was nothing short of revolutionary. Earth seemed to grin and say, "Congratulations, you've just unlocked the endurance upgrade." Picture a Lagosuchus in action. It waits near the edge of scrub, still as stone. Then, sensing opportunity, it darts forward. Legs ablur, tail streaming, head bobbing lightly with each stride. It is not chasing immense prey. It is chasing survival, insects, small vertebrates, the fleeting promise of food. Every step is a triumph over gravity, over heat, over hunger. Its entire life is motion, and in that motion lies the foundation of future empire. But Lagosuchus was not alone. Across the Triassic, other small archosaurs experimented with similar designs. Some were lightly built, long-legged, with hands that still bore the marks of grasping ancestors. Others toyed with quadrupedalism, balancing between old and new modes of movement. In all of them, the hips told the story, joints rotated beneath the body, sockets deepened, muscles reconfigured. Step by step, generation by generation, the blueprint of the dinosaur was drafted. And let us not forget the environment that shaped them. The Triassic was unforgiving, hot, dry, a land of deserts and intermittent wetlands. Large-bodied creatures struggled with water loss, with heat dissipation, with sheer bulk. But the small archosaurs thrived in this crucible. Their size meant efficiency. They could dart between shaded spots, dig for moisture, hunt insects at dusk when the air cooled. They were not trapped by the extremes. They maneuvered through them. Earth seemed to lean close and whisper, "Be small, be swift, and you will outlast the giants." Adaptation was not only about legs. Skull structures shifted too. Archosaurs like Lagosuchus showed lighter bones, openings in the skull that reduced weight, stronger jaw muscles positioned for snapping, teeth sharpened into tools for seizing small, fast prey, eyes enlarged, giving sharper vision, perhaps even in dim light. Every feature hinted at precision, at speed, at focus. The body of Alagasuchus was a toolkit, honed for survival in a competitive, harsh world. And while they did not yet dominate, they were preparing. Predators larger and more imposing overshadowed them. Yet these little archosaurs played the long game. Rossuchians ruled with size, amphibians held on with bulk. But size and bulk come at a cost. The climate favored adaptability, and adaptability favored the small, the agile, the inventive. It was not obvious at the time, but the archosaurs carried the blueprint of the future in their bones. Humor sneaks into the image too. Picture a Lagosocus staring up at a towering Rayusuchian, tail twitching nervously. If it could speak, it might mutter, "Don't mind me just passing through at 90 kilometers an hour." Or imagine it encountering one of the lumbering amphibians blinking at the massive, sluggish creature, then darting past with the irreverence of a marathon runner overtaking a dozing giant. The Triassic was full of contrasts, and Lagosocus embodied the cheeky defiance of the small against the slow. The innovation of upright posture set off a cascade of evolutionary advantages. With better locomotion came new ecological opportunities. Small archosaurs could explore open plains, chase prey in bursts, migrate farther when conditions worsened. Their physiology likely allowed more efficient thermal regulation, tolerating the heat that stifled others. Their reproductive strategies may have favored survival too, with eggs laid in hidden nests, small clutches adapted to harsh conditions. Each advantage was subtle, but together they built momentum. Over millions of years, these small archosaurs diversified. Some remained modest, quick insect hunters. Others stretched into larger forms, experimenting with new diets and new habitats. The lineages branched, some toward crocodilian ancestors, others toward what would soon be recognized as the first true dinosaurs. The boundary between archosaur and dinosaur was not a sharp line, but a gradual shading, bone by bone, feature by feature. Somewhere in that gradient, Lagosocus and its kin handed the baton forward. The earth, in its dry humor, might have said, "Start small, don't worry, you'll grow into it." And indeed they did. The Triassic closed not with Lagosocus, still darting alone, but with its descendants already taking on new shapes, testing the waters of dominance. Bipedalism grew stronger, limbs lengthened, necks stretched, tails stiffened into stabilizers. The world was preparing for the Jurassic Symphony, but its opening notes were played by these tiny runners. It is worth pausing to reflect on scale. We marvel at dinosaurs for their size, but their greatness was not born in size. It was born in posture, in stamina, in agility. The giants of later ages carried forward the innovations of these little Triassic creatures. Every sauropod that towered over forests, every tyrannosaur that thundered across plains, every bird that took to the skies, all of them owed their heritage to the Lagosocus blueprint. Greatness was seeded in smallness. If you could watch time-lapse footage of the Triassic, spanning millions of years, you would see the desert shift, the swamps flicker in and out, the forests inch taller, and in the foreground you would see tiny archosaurs sprinting, multiplying, experimenting. At first they would seem insignificant, outshone by predators larger and flashier. But as frames ticked by, those larger predators would vanish, their bones sinking into oblivion, while the small archosaurs remained, their forms subtly changing, their descendants edging closer to the dinosaurs. The film would end with a crescendo, the dawn of the Jurassic, and the dinosaurs ready to claim the crown. Yet, the charm of this story is not only in its conclusion, but in its beginnings. Lagosocus and its kin were not aware of destiny. They did not run thinking, "One day my descendants will dominate the earth." They ran because running meant survival. They hunted insects because hunger demanded it. They balanced on slender limbs because it worked. Evolution has no foresight, only persistence. And persistence, in the Triassic, favored the swift. So let us celebrate them not as footnotes but as pioneers. The Lagosocus darting through heat haze, the small archosaurs blinking wide eyes at sunsets, tails flicking in balance. They were the bridge between the old world and the new, the runners who carried life from fragility into resilience, from survival into dominance. The Triassic whispers their legacy, even now. Look at a bird darting across a summer sky, wings beating with effortless rhythm. Inside that bird is the shadow of Legacious, the echo of the first upright stride. Look at the skeleton of a dinosaur in a museum, the hip socket, the upright legs, the balance of tail and body. Inside that skeleton is the blueprint drafted by small archosaurs in a hot, dry world. Look at a marathon runner, lungs steady, stride efficient. Somewhere in the deep recesses of evolutionary history, a Legacious nods in recognition. The age of dinosaurs was not inevitable. It was built step by step, stride by stride by creatures so small they might have gone unnoticed. And yet, in their unnoticed lives, they rewrote the rules of motion, of endurance, of possibility. They proved that greatness does not begin with size or strength, but with adaptation. So imagine the earth leaning close to them, whispering encouragement across the heat. Run, little ones. The future is yours. And they did. They ran into history, into legend, into the very fabric of life on Earth. From Legacious to the giants, the line is unbroken. The dynasty of dinosaurs began not with thunder but with quick, darting shadows. And in those shadows, the world was forever changed. If the Triassic world had a rogue, a shadow slipping between the rocks with speed and precision, it was Herrerasaurus. Long before the thunder of giant sauropods or the terrifying roars of tyrannosaurs, before horns and crests and sails decorated the bodies of future dinosaurs, there was this sleek predator, a pioneer of the hunt, a master of agility, and one of the earliest dinosaurs to prowl the earth. Its name rolls off the tongue with a kind of sharpness, Herrerasaurus like the hiss of a blade drawn from a sheath. And indeed its body was a weapon tuned for survival. Herrerasaurus lived about 20-31 million years ago, during the late Triassic, in what is now South America. Back then, the land that would become Argentina was part of the great supercontinent, but for Herrerasaurus it was home. Dry landscapes, scattered forests, river valleys bordered by scrub. Picture a world of dust and sun, shadows of cycads, swaying in hot breezes, and the rustle of small reptiles darting among rocks. It was in this crucible of heat and scarcity that Herrerasaurus carved out its life as a hunter. At first glance, it was not enormous by dinosaur standards. Adults stretched between 3 and 6 meters in length, about the size of a small car, and stood just over a meter at the hip. To us accustomed to imagining dinosaurs as towering behemoth, Herrerasaurus might seem modest, but in its own age it was formidable. In a land where most creatures were still experimenting with size and form, this predator was lean, fast, and undeniably dangerous. Its body told the story of its lifestyle. The hind limbs were powerful, long, and muscled like coiled springs. Each step launched Herrerasaurus forward in bounding strides. It was not built for plodding. It was built for sprinting, for closing distance before prey could escape. Its forelimbs, though shorter, carried sharp claws, useful for grasping and holding. And its jaws, the jaws were the masterpiece. Lined with serrated teeth curved backward, they were perfect for slicing flesh. Each bite was both a wound and a grip, tearing and holding at once. The skull of Herrerasaurus was narrow, elongated, and equipped with joints that allowed flexibility. Its bite was quick, decisive, a flash of teeth before retreat. If you could hear it hunting, you might not hear much at all. A whisper of footsteps on dry soil, a rush of air, and then the snap of jaws closing around prey. Silence, then violence, then silence again. What did it hunt? Mostly small reptiles, early mammal relatives, and whatever it could overpower. Herrerasaurus was not picky. It was opportunistic, a practical predator in a harsh world. In dry environments, meals were not guaranteed. To survive, it had to be efficient, willing to chase anything edible. Imagine it spotting a smaller reptile basking in the sun, muscles tense, tail balancing. It lunges forward, closing the gap in seconds. Its claws pin the squirming body, teeth slice through scales, and the hunt is over, almost before it began. The earth might smirk and murmur, "Hunt quickly, Herrerasaurus. Dinner does not wait." In its time, Herrerasaurus was among the top predators of its region. The massive Rhesusaurians still stalked larger prey, but Heresasaurus thrived in its niche. It was not a heavyweight brawler, but a nimble assassin, its body adapted for precision strikes. If the Rhesusaurians were tanks, Heresasaurus was the sports car, sleek, fast, built for acceleration and maneuverability. And it was adaptable. The hot, dry Triassic environment was unforgiving, with long stretches of scarcity punctuated by sudden abundance when rains came. Heresasaurus could endure those cycles. It could stalk prey near rivers when they swelled with life, or scour the arid land for desperate animals when drought struck. Its very physiology, light bones, efficient posture, stamina-enhancing gait, gave it the flexibility to survive in conditions that defeated less adaptable creatures. Yet Heresasaurus was more than a hunter. It was a glimpse of what dinosaurs would become. In its body, we see the blueprint of future predators: upright posture, bipedal locomotion, balance through the tail, speed as survival. Later theropods, Allosaurus, Velociraptor, Tyrannosaurus would refine these traits, enlarging, specializing, diversifying. But Heresasaurus was among the first drafts, a prototype that already worked astonishingly well. Evolution, in its playful seriousness, had struck gold. To imagine Heresasaurus in motion is to imagine grace with menace. Its head sways as it walks, tail straight, each step deliberate. The eyes, forward-facing and keen, scan for motion. Its nostrils flare, tasting the air for scent. Then, when prey betrays itself, a rustle in leaves, a flicker of scales, it accelerates. Dust rises beneath its feet. The chase is swift, brutal, final, and then after the kill, it pauses, jaws red, tail swaying slowly as if to savor both victory and silence. Humor, of course, lingers even in predators. Picture Heresasaurus in the noonday heat, sprawled beneath the sparse shade of a conifer, mouth open, panting, its eyes half-lidded. It looks less like a terror of the Triassic and more like a weary dog in summer, muttering internally, "Too hot to hunt. Wake me when the sun goes down." Or imagine a young Heresasaurus learning to stalk, lunging too soon and landing face first in the dust while its intended prey scurries away. Even predators have clumsy beginnings. Its fossil record tells us much. Discovered in Argentina in the 1950s, Heresasaurus challenged paleontologists with its mix of traits. Was it a true dinosaur, a cousin, a primitive experiment? Over decades, careful study revealed it as one of the earliest theropods, firmly within the dinosaur lineage, yet still bearing hints of its archosaurian ancestry. Its anatomy is a bridge, not yet specialized, but clearly on the path that would lead to the great predators of later eras. Consider the resilience of this creature, born into a world recovering from mass extinction, living among rivals larger and stranger. It found a way to not only survive, but to thrive. It did not wait for conditions to improve. It adapted to the ones it had. Fast legs, sharp teeth, efficient lungs. Each feature was an answer to the Triassic's relentless test. Heresasaurus did not whine about the heat or the scarcity. It sprinted through them, sharp-eyed and sharp-toothed. And though we admire it now as one of the earliest dinosaurs, in its time it was simply an animal, doing what life has always done, trying to endure. It was not aware of legacy, of destiny, of being a first. It was aware only of hunger, of thirst, of opportunity. It was life stripped to essentials: run, hunt, eat, rest, repeat. Yet in those simple cycles, it carried forward the line of dinosaurs that would one day reshape the Earth. If you could stand in the Triassic night and watch Heresasaurus, you would see a silhouette against the stars, lean, low, tail stretched behind. You would hear the scrape of claws on stone, the soft huff of breath. Then you would hear silence again, broken only by the distant chorus of insects. Heresasaurus was not loud, it was efficient, not grandiose, it was practical. And in that practicality lay its brilliance. So let us honor Heresasaurus, not as a primitive, but as a pioneer. It was a predator when predators were needed, a survivor when survival was hard, an innovator when the Earth demanded invention. It was not the largest, not the flashiest, but it was one of the first to stride the path that would lead to the age of dinosaurs. Imagine Earth itself, watching this sleek hunter race across dry ground and whispering with sly amusement, "Run fast, little predator. The world belongs to those who can keep pace." Orosaurus did not roar into history. It loped, it sprinted, it hunted, it survived, and in doing so it lit the spark of a dynasty. The giants were coming. The future thundered just beyond the horizon. But before all that, in the dust and heat of Triassic South America, there was Orosaurus, the early hunter, the swift pioneer, the blade in the shadows. If the Triassic deserts had a streak of lightning, a flash of speed darting across the baked earth, it was Coelophysis. Not the largest, not the loudest, but perhaps one of the most agile. This dinosaur embodied quickness itself. Long before colossal sauropods grazed like moving mountains or giant predators thundered across the landscape, Coelophysis lived lean, fast, and clever. Its very name means hollow form, a reference to its lightweight bones, but it might as well have meant swift shadow, for that is what it was in life, a blur against the sunlit ground, chasing after small prey before vanishing into shimmering heat. Coelophysis lived more than 20 million years ago, during the late Triassic, in what we now call North America. At that time, the region was hot, dry, and unpredictable, a patchwork of deserts, rivers, and scrublands. Imagine yourself standing in that land, cicadas buzzing in the heat, wind stirring dust into the air, and then movement. A flash of slender legs, a tail stiff as a rudder, a head angled forward with sharp eyes fixed on a target. That was Coelophysis, 2 to 3 meters of pure agility, a predator built less like a heavyweight fighter and more like a sprinter. Its body was a study in efficiency. Lightweight, with hollow bones that reduced mass without sacrificing strength, it could accelerate in an instant. The legs were long and narrow, designed for speed and endurance, its tail stretched behind, stiffened by overlapping bones, serving as a counterbalance, so it could pivot sharply mid-stride. Its forelimbs were shorter but armed with grasping claws, tools for seizing wriggling prey. The skull was narrow and elongated, lined with sharp recurved teeth, not enormous blades but small, serrated knives, perfect for gripping insects, lizards, and whatever else could be caught in a burst of speed. What made Coelophysis extraordinary was not size, but adaptation. In a world where food was often scarce, it specialized in small meals. While larger predators struggled to secure enough to eat, Coelophysis hunted the overlooked, insects scuttling through undergrowth, tiny reptiles basking in the sun, small amphibians lurking in muddy pools. Its strategy was simple: eat often, eat small, and stay fast enough to catch the next bite. It was the Triassic's connoisseur of appetizers, the dinosaur equivalent of someone perfectly happy with a never-ending tray of snacks, rather than a feast. The earth itself might have chuckled and said, "Stay quick, little hunter. The buffet is tiny, but it never runs out." Picture a hunt. The sun beats down on red earth. A small reptile, no larger than a modern lizard, scurries from the shade of a cycad. Its claws scratch the soil. Its head lifts to taste the hot air. Then impact. Coelophysis lunges, its stride covering meters in a harp. Dust sprays behind it, tail slicing a perfect line in the air. The reptile darts left, but Coelophysis pivots, claws extended. In an instant, teeth sink into soft flesh and the meal is won. No roar, no spectacle, just speed, precision, and the quiet satisfaction of survival. Speed was not only for hunting, it was also for avoiding becoming prey. Coelophysis was small, compared to many Triassic predators. At 2 to 3 meters long, it was slender, not bulky. Its defense was its agility. If threatened, it could sprint away, weaving through sparse vegetation, vanishing into heat haze, before slower creatures could react. Its bones were hollow, its frame light, its muscles tuned for acceleration. To chase a Coelophysis was often to lose sight of it. Imagine a larger predator lumbering after it, jaws snapping at empty air, while Coelophysis disappeared with a flick of its tail. Nature loves irony, and in the Triassic, that irony was simple. Sometimes the fastest lived longer. The fossils of Coelophysis tell us much. Hundreds of individuals have been found in New Mexico's Ghost Ranch, a site where floods buried entire groups together. These fossils show that Coelophysis was not rare or solitary. It thrived in numbers, populating wide stretches of the Triassic landscape. Did it hunt in packs? The evidence is debated, but the sheer abundance of bones suggests it may have lived in groups, perhaps gathering near water sources or moving together across dry plains. Imagine dozens of Coelophysis trotting side by side, a wave of slender bodies, tails raised, claws glinting. To see them would be to see speed multiplied, an entire chorus line of agility. Their abundance also reveals their success. Coelophysis was not a failed experiment. It flourished for millions of years, adapting to shifting conditions, proving that small size was no disadvantage. Where larger predators sometimes teetered on the brink of extinction, Coelophysis darted through, untroubled by scarcity. Its diet was flexible, its body efficient, its reproduction seemingly prolific. Evolution favored it, because it played the survival game with cleverness instead of brute strength. And humor lies here too. Imagine a Coelophysis chasing a dragonfly, leaping to snap it from the air, only to land awkwardly and skid in the dust. Or picture two Coelophysis squabbling over a beetle, hissing, clawing, circling over an insect no bigger than your thumb. The dignity of predators sometimes shrinks when dinner is tiny. But survival is survival, and Coelophysis knew no shame in chasing the small. Its motto might have been, "If it moves, and it fits in my mouth, it's food." Its physiology was elegant in detail. The long neck allowed quick strikes at ground-dwelling prey. Its eyes were forward-angled, giving depth perception for precise targeting. Its lungs, likely bird-like in efficiency, supported stamina that let it run and hunt without exhaustion. The tail, stiff and straight, was a marvel of balance, allowing sudden turns without tipping over. Even its hollow bones carried advantage: lighter body, faster acceleration, quicker recovery after exertion. Coelophysis was not designed for raw power, it was designed for fine-tuned efficiency. Living in North America's Triassic heat, it was perfectly adapted to the climate. Its body shed heat quickly, its activity patterns likely shifting with the day, hunting in the cooler mornings, and evenings resting in shade at midday. Its eggs, small and numerous, would have been laid in shallow nests, vulnerable yet plentiful. Reproduction was about numbers, ensuring that enough hatchlings survived despite the dangers of drought, predators, and the unpredictable whims of the Triassic Earth. In its time, Coelophysis was one of the most widespread dinosaurs. It set the stage for the theropod dynasty to come, while later theropods would grow immense. Allosaurus with its bone-rushing jaws, Spinosaurus prowling rivers, Tyrannosaurus towering as apex predator. Coelophysis showed that even small, agile hunters could thrive. It proved that dinosaurs were not bound by size alone, but by adaptability. If you stood in the Triassic and watched a Coelophysis, you might at first dismiss it. Too small, too slender, too modest. But watch it run, watch it hunt, watch it slip through shadows, and you would understand. Here was survival in its purest form. Coelophysis was not about intimidation, it was about persistence. It did not need to roar, it needed only to keep moving, keep eating, keep surviving, and in that it succeeded brilliantly. The earth itself might have leaned down to whisper, "Run fast, little hunter. Your prey is small, but your legacy will be enormous." And so it was. Coelophysis, the agile one, thrived where others faltered. It lived in numbers, sprinted through scarcity, and embodied the lesson of the Triassic: adapt quickly or vanish. It may not have been the king of its age, but it was the survivor, the opportunist, the swift shadow that slipped through time. Its bones, preserved in stone, still seem to hum with speed, as if even in death it cannot stay still. In the grand symphony of dinosaurs, Coelophysis was not the thunderous drum or the booming horn. It was the quick violin, the darting flute, the fast rhythm that gave life its tempo. And without that tempo, the symphony would never have built to its crescendo. So remember Coelophysis not just as a small dinosaur, but as a master of agility, a whisper of speed in the Triassic heat, a creature that lived by motion and survived by cleverness. It did not need to be huge, it only needed to be fast, and in its swiftness it left a mark that time could never erase. In the gallery of the Triassic, Among the lean hunters and swift shadows, a new figure emerged, a creature not built for speed or stealth, but for size, persistence, and the quiet power of eating. This was Plateosaurus, one of the earliest true giants among dinosaurs, a pioneer of herbivory on a grand scale. If Colophysis was a violin note of agility, Plateosaurus was the slow, steady drumbeat that gave rhythm to the age. Long-necked, heavy-bodied, and insatiably hungry, it hiked the open landscapes of late Triassic Europe, cropping ferns and conifers with a patience that bordered on artistry. Plateosaurus lived about 214 to 204 million years ago, thriving across what is now Central and Northern Europe. Back then, Europe was not the quilt of countries and mountains we know today, but a landscape of seasonal rivers, scrubby forests, and swampy lowlands. In that setting, Plateosaurus became one of the dominant herbivores, growing to length between 5 and 10 meters longer than a city bus, and weighing up to 4 tons. For a world still experimenting with large body plans, Plateosaurus was an audacious statement, the first whisper of the giant herbivores that would later thunder across the Jurassic and Cretaceous. Its body was both elegant and practical. The long neck stretched forward and upward, granting access to vegetation out of reach for smaller animals. Imagine a slow sway, the head gliding from fern to cycad, from low conifer branch to horsetail grove. Its skull was small compared to its bulk, with leaf-shaped teeth lined in neat rows, perfectly suited for nipping and stripping plant material. No serrated daggers here. Plateosaurus carried a mouthful of efficient scissors, endlessly clipping green. Its forelimbs, though shorter than its hind limbs, were strong and tipped with claws. These claws could rake branches toward the mouth, pull down foliage, or perhaps dig for roots in soft soil. The hind legs were long and sturdy, built for supporting its bulk. It could walk on all fours when needed, but evidence suggests it often reared back, balancing on its massive hind limbs and stiff tail, stretching its neck to pluck at higher branches. Picture a 10-meter animal casually rising onto 2 legs to reach the salad bar above, tail braced behind like a living tripod. Evolution's message was clear. If you're going to eat plants, make sure you can reach plenty of them. The tail itself was a counterbalance, thick and muscular, sweeping behind with each step. It was not a weapon like the tails of later dinosaurs, but a stabilizer, a constant reminder that Plateosaurus's body was a masterpiece of balance. The whole animal, despite its size, was surprisingly graceful. It did not thunder clumsily through its world. It moved with slow, deliberate confidence, the way a massive ship glides across a calm sea. Its diet was simple but relentless. Ferns, cycads, conifers, horsetails. Day after day, hour after hour, Plateosaurus cropped vegetation. It had no chewing mechanism to grind its food as mammals would later develop. Instead, it swallowed chunks whole, letting its long digestive tract do the heavy lifting. Fermentation, microbial allies, and time worked together to break down the tough plant fibers. To keep its furnace running, it had to eat a lot. Imagine the sound of continuous cropping, branches snapping, ferns tearing, a constant background murmur of herbivory. Plateosaurus was not loud like a predator. It was steady, like the sound of wind in trees, the hush of an endless meal. But size was more than appetite. It was also armor. At up to 4 tons, Plateosaurus was not easy prey. Small predators ignored it. Larger ones might have risked a strike. But even then, Plateosaurus was no pushover. Its bulk alone was deterrent enough, and when threatened, it could rear back, lash with claws, and strike with sheer force. No one wanted to wrestle a moving wall of muscle and bone. Survival by intimidation was a strategy that worked, and Plateosaurus carried it well. Its fossils tell us a story not only of size, but of numbers. Plateosaurus remains are abundant across Europe, found in Germany, Switzerland, and beyond. Entire bone beds of individuals have been discovered, suggesting herds or at least groups living in the same habitats. To picture them together is to see an astonishing scene. Dozens of Plateosaurus moving slowly across a Triassic valley, necks swaying in rhythm, tails sweeping behind, like a procession of living cranes made of flesh and bone. Dust rises with each step. Vegetation rustles and snaps under their feeding, and the ground vibrates softly with their weight. What might it have been like to walk among them? At first overwhelming, their sheer size would dwarf a human observer, their shadows stretching across the scrub. Yet there is also something strangely calming in the thought. Plateosaurus was not aggressive. It had no interest in you unless you happened to be a leafy branch. Its eyes, set in a small head, would glance past, indifferent. For them, survival was about eating, moving, and eating again. They were not dramatic. They were persistent. Persistence, in fact, is one of their defining traits. Plateosaurus was adaptable. It thrived in open woodlands, in swampy lowlands, in areas where seasonal floods and droughts alternated. Its body could cope with scarcity by moving long distances in search of food. Its reproductive strategy, though still debated, likely involved laying many eggs, ensuring that at least some young survived the hazards of heat, drought, and predators. In every sense, it was built not just to live, but to continue. And humor clings even to giants. Imagine a Plateosaurus stretching its neck to nibble a stubborn branch, tugging awkwardly until the branch finally snaps, sending leaves scattering and the dinosaur stumbling slightly, tail swaying for balance. Or picture a young Plateosaurus testing its size, rearing back proudly to reach higher than its siblings, only to topple into a patch of mud with an undignified splash. The giants were not without their clumsiness, and clumsiness makes even prehistory smile. The scientific importance of Plateosaurus cannot be overstated. It is one of the best-known early dinosaurs, its fossils providing a window into the dawn of gigantism. Before it, dinosaurs were small, nimble creatures. Plateosaurus shows how quickly evolution explored size as a strategy, from shadows darting through scrub to giants swaying above it in only a few million years. Its anatomy reveals the innovations that would define later herbivores. Elongated necks, strong hind limbs, specialized teeth, massive guts. In Plateosaurus we see the rehearsal for the sauropods, the true titans of the Jurassic. But Plateosaurus deserves to be remembered not as a rehearsal, but as a star in its own right. It was successful, widespread, and abundant. It was not an experiment that failed, but a lineage that thrived in its time. For nearly 10 million years, Plateosaurus and its kin dominated their landscapes. That longevity alone testifies to their success. Evolution is not impressed by glamour. It rewards persistence, and Plateosaurus persisted. If you could sit quietly on a Triassic ridge and watch them, you would see not drama, but rhythm. The rhythm of necks moving side to side, of jaws clipping, of bodies shifting slowly forward. You would hear the crackle of plants, the sigh of tails brushing earth. You would feel the ground tremble softly under their combined weight. And you might find yourself lulled, not terrified. Plateosaurus was not a creature of nightmares. It was a creature of endurance, of abundance, of patience. The earth itself might have leaned close to whisper, "Eat well, gentle giant. The plants are plenty, and your kind will shape the land." Indeed, Plateosaurus did shape the land. By cropping vegetation, it influenced plant communities, opening space for regrowth, dispersing spores and seeds, trampling new paths. In its wake, ecosystems adjusted. It was not just a consumer, it was an ecological force, slow but steady, shaping its world through appetite. And appetite is, in many ways, the quiet driver of history. Plateosaurus's hunger was endless, but it was also creative. From its meals came survival, from survival came continuity, and from continuity came the blueprint for giants yet to come. It did not know it, but every mouthful was a step toward the sauropods, the creatures that would one day tower over forests like walking mountains. Plateosaurus was the first verse in that long poem, the opening chord in that thunderous song. So let us remember it not just as a name in stone, but as a presence that once filled European valleys with movement and sound. The Plateosaurus, 5 to 10 meters of steady hunger, neck swaying, tail balancing, jaws clipping, a creature that taught the Triassic that size could be survival, that patience could be power, that eating could be destiny. If you ever find yourself in a museum, staring up at its skeleton, let your imagination breathe life back into it. Flesh the bones with muscle, Cover them in scales. Let the neck sway forward and the tail stretch behind. Hear the soft thud of footsteps, the tearing of ferns, the sigh of breath, and perhaps smile, imagining the earth chuckling as it watched. Don't try to ride it. It's no horse. Just admire it. The first gentle giant. Plateosaurus was not thunderous. It was not ferocious. It was steady, persistent, enduring. And in that steadiness, it carved its chapter in the great story of life, one mouthful of fern at a time. The Triassic continent was not a gentle host. It did not offer lush meadows or endless shade, nor did it provide rivers that flowed kindly year-round. It was a land of extremes, deserts that stretched beyond sight, forests that grew thin and scattered, swamps that breathed with humidity only in narrow bands of coast. Yet despite the harshness, this land was alive. Life in the Triassic was not abundant in the way we imagine later ages, but it was ingenious. Every plant, every insect, every reptile and dinosaur that dared the land had to adapt to survive, and together they wove an ecosystem as stark as it was astonishing, a drama of hunger, patience, and endurance played on the grandest of stages. Begin with the deserts, those vast interiors where the ground cracked in the heat and the wind whispered across endless dunes. Rain was scarce, shade scarcer still, the sun bore down like a relentless overseer, and the nights, though cooler, held their own dangers. Yet even here, life persisted. Small, swift dinosaurs darted across open ground, their slender bodies built for both speed and stamina. They hunted lizards, insects, and any small prey careless enough to linger in the open. Each chase was short and decisive, a blur of dust and claws followed by silence. In the desert, efficiency was everything. Waste no energy, miss no chance. These hunters shared the desert with creatures far less agile, but equally determined. Reptiles burrowed into the soil to escape the heat, emerging at dusk when the air softened. Insects buzzed tirelessly, filling the air with whines and clicks, each one both nuisance and nutrition. Sparse vegetation clung to rocky patches, ferns sprouting in the rare damp spots, cycads unfurling stiff crowns of leaves where their roots could find water. Life in the desert was a delicate balance, a test of patience and timing. To survive, creatures had to move when the opportunity appeared and vanish when the heat returned. Predators shaped the rhythm of the desert. Their presence forced prey into perpetual alertness. A lizard sunning itself on a rock never truly relaxed. A dragonfly skimming a shallow pool darted with constant caution. The ecosystem was a game of vigilance, where the careless quickly became food, yet predators themselves walked a thin line. They could not afford to waste energy on failed hunts. Each chase had to matter. In the desert, hunger was not an inconvenience. It was a shadow that followed every creature, predator and prey alike. Shift now toward the coasts, where rivers wound sluggishly through lowlands, and forests spread in thin but determined patches. Here the air grew heavy with humidity, and the landscape seemed alive with greenery compared to the desolate interior. Conifers stretched their needle-like branches upward, cycads formed stiff groves, and ferns unfurled in dense mats beneath the canopy. It was not the towering, lush forests of later ages, but it was shade, it was food, it was life. In these coastal forests, the herbivores found their strength. Large, long-necked dinosaurs moved slowly among the trees, cropping foliage with steady persistence. Their bodies swayed like living cranes, necks rising to reach conifer branches, dipping to strip ferns from the ground. They ate not in bursts but in rhythm, hour after hour, their massive stomachs processing the constant flow of greenery. The forests bore their mark, branches bent, groves thinned, ferns torn and trampled. Yet the plants endured, regrowing as quickly as they could, feeding the endless hunger of the giants. Predators haunted these forests too, but their strategies differed from the desert hunters. Here, stealth mattered as much as speed. In the dappled shade, predators waited, eyes fixed, muscles taut, ready to lunge when a smaller reptile or a distracted herbivore strayed too close. The undergrowth rustled with insects, small amphibians, and reptiles, each one a link in the food web. Birds had not yet taken to the air, But insects filled the sky with hums and flashes of iridescence, their buzzing a constant chorus to the forest drama. Interactions between predator and herbivore shaped the forest ecosystem. Herbivores had to remain vigilant, lifting their heads often, scanning for movement in the shadows. Predators relied on surprise, stalking silently until the final moment. Sometimes the hunt succeeded, sometimes they failed, but each encounter reminded both sides of the precarious balance of survival. The forests were not peaceful, but they were vibrant, every leaf and shadow part of the constant negotiation between life and death. The swamps near the coast added another layer of richness. Here, amphibians clung to their ancient ways, lurking in muddy waters, their bulk and patience serving them well. Insects swarmed above stagnant pools, their wings catching the sunlight in flashing mosaics. Reptiles prowled the edges, dipping into water to cool, emerging to bask in the sun. Life here was noisy, buzzing and croaking, splashing and snapping. The swamp was a banquet for those who could endure its mud and its biting insects. Together, the deserts, forests, and swamps formed a mosaic of survival. Each ecosystem carried its own rules, its own challenges, its own strategies, yet they were not isolated. Animals moved between them, following rivers from dry interiors to coastal groves, seeking food, water, and safety. Migration was not grand or seasonal as in later ages, but constant, subtle, a daily shift in search of survival. Life flowed between these ecosystems like blood through veins, connecting desert to forest, forest to swamp, swamp to open plain, and always, the Triassic earth tested them. Droughts came, drying rivers, leaving bones scattered in cracked soil. Floods followed, sudden and violent, sweeping herds and hunters alike into muddy graves. Fires sparked by lightning raced through dry forests, leaving blackened trunks and ash that ferns would later reclaim. It was a land of cycles, harsh but renewing, destructive but generative. Every catastrophe opened new opportunities. Every disaster cleared a path for something to grow. From a distance, the Triassic continent might have looked barren. From within, it was alive with tension, energy, and resilience. Dinosaurs, reptiles, amphibians, and insects filled every niche they could, weaving interactions that held the ecosystem together. Predators shaped prey behavior, herbivores shaped vegetation, plants shaped the very rhythm of survival. It was a delicate system, yet one robust enough to last millions of years. Humor lurked even in this harshness. Picture a predator crouched in the shade, waiting hours for a chance to strike, only to have its intended prey startle at a buzzing insect and dart away long before the attack. Or imagine a herd of herbivores, necks stretched to strip branches, suddenly scattering at the splash of an amphibian that had no interest in them at all. The Triassic Earth seemed to wink at its inhabitants. Survival isn't easy, but it can be amusing. The true wonder of the Triassic continental ecosystem was its inventiveness. Every creature, plant and insect had adapted in ways that were not perfect but effective. Hollow bones for speed, long necks for reach, tough leaves to resist drought, burrows for shelter, wings for escape, spores for persistence. Nothing was wasted. Everything was tried. It was an age of prototypes, of experiments that sometimes failed, but often succeeded just enough to carry forward. The deserts, though harsh, proved that speed and efficiency could be survival. The forests, though sparse, proved that size and patience could build endurance. The swamps, though chaotic, proved that resilience and flexibility could sustain life. Together they formed a continental ecosystem both unforgiving and fertile, harsh yet creative. If you could walk there, across the cracked deserts and into the shaded forests, you would not see endless abundance. You would see survival sharpened to an art. Every chase mattered. Every bite of fern mattered. Every rustle in the undergrowth mattered. And in that intensity, the ecosystem thrived. The earth itself might have leaned close to murmur, "Struggle well, my children. This land is not easy, but it is yours if you can endure." And endure they did. For millions of years, life on the Triassic continents adapted, persisted, and prepared the stage for the even greater dramas to come. The deserts would one day give way to grasslands. The forests would thicken into jungles. The swamps would evolve into wetlands teeming with birds and mammals. But all of that was far in the future. In the Triassic, the land was already alive, already complete in its own stark and beautiful way. It was not paradise, but it was home. And in that home, life learned to run, to graze, to wait, to endure. The Triassic continental ecosystem was a lesson written in sand, fern, and bone, that survival in a harsh world is not about comfort, but about persistence. If the land of the Triassic was harsh, dry, and demanding, the seas offered a different stage, vast, shimmering, alive with motion. Surrounding the great supercontinent stretched the immeasurable waters of Panthalassa, a single ocean so broad it seemed endless. Beneath its sunlit waves, life was rebuilding, just as it was on land, rising from extinction's ashes into new forms, new strategies, new dramas. The water was warm, shallow in many places, and rich with nutrients. It was here that ecosystems flourished, delicate yet vibrant, where predators glided like arrows, prey darted in swirling schools, and reefs pulsed with quiet industry. Imagine slipping beneath the waves of Panthalassa. The surface sparkles above, fractured into liquid diamonds by the sun. Below, the water glows a pale green, filled with drifting particles, the living dust of the ocean. Shoals of small fish dart in quicksilver flashes, turning in unison, as though commanded by one invisible thought. And then, through the shimmering light, a shadow glides, a long, sleek body, fins cutting with precision, tail swaying in effortless rhythm. This is the ichthyosaur, one of the great predators of the Triassic seas, a reptile transformed into something dolphin-like, streamlined for speed, perfected for pursuit. Ichthyosaurs were masters of their element. Their bodies, though reptilian in ancestry, had evolved into shapes that rival modern marine mammals. Their limbs became flippers, their tails forked and muscular, their eyes enormous for spotting prey in dim waters. To watch one hunt was to see grace sharpened by hunger. A school of fish flickers left, the ichthyosaur arcs smoothly, accelerating like living lightning. Its jaws snap, rows of sharp teeth closing around a wriggling body, and with barely a pause it swallows and surges onward. It is tireless, a predator sculpted by the ocean itself. Earth, amused, might whisper, "Yes, you came from land, but look at you now, you belong to the sea." Yet, ichthyosaurs were not alone. Sharing the waters were the elegant, endlessly spiraled ammonites, relatives of squid and octopuses, but armored in shells coiled like mathematical dreams. They floated and swam with gentle pulses, their tentacles reaching to grasp plankton, fish, and drifting morsels. Ammonites were the jewels of the Triassic seas, their shells patterned with ridges and sutures as intricate as lace. Some were tiny, delicate as a coin, others grew to the size of dinner plates. They drifted in every current, filling niches from shallow reefs to deeper waters. Their abundance made them vital. Prey for ichthyosaurs and other predators, markers of time in the fossil record, silent witnesses to the rise and fall of ages. To see them alive would have been to see a living galaxy of spirals, each shell catching the light, like a turning star. Beneath the swimming hunters and drifting ammonites, the seafloor held its own drama. In warm, shallow waters, reefs grew. Not yet the coral reefs of later times, but early communities of sponges, algae, and tiny reef builders. They formed ridges and mounds, creating shelters where fish, crustaceans, and mollusks thrived. Imagine approaching a bustling city beneath the waves, its walls alive with growth, its alleys filled with darting fish, its rooftops crowned with waving fronds of algae. Shrimp clambered among crevices, crabs scuttled sideways in hurried errands, while strange Triassic fish with armored scales glided past, their mouths working in perpetual nibbling. The reef was both refuge and marketplace, a meeting ground for predator and prey. Small fish found hiding spots in its nooks, while larger hunters circled outside, waiting for the unwary. The water here pulsed with color and sound. Snap of jaws, the scrape of shells, the crackle of tiny organisms. It was the heartbeat of the shallow sea, delicate, yet enduring. Higher in the water, other reptiles joined the ichthyosaurs. Some were smaller, more lizard-like, hunting along the coasts, their movements jerky compared to the sleek precision of their dolphin-shaped cousins. Others experimented with forms that seemed almost alien, long-necked, short-bodied, or flattened into odd profiles. The seas of the Triassic were laboratories of evolution, testing shapes and strategies, discarding what failed, perfecting what worked. For every elegant ichthyosaur there was another odd experiment, a creature halfway between lizard and seal, between fish and reptile, and all around them moved the quieter players, the fish. Ray-finned fish, already abundant, darted through every layer of the ocean. Some were small, silver flashes that vanished at the hint of shadow. Others bore heavy scales, armor against the teeth of predators. Their schools rippled like living fabrics, turning and folding in endless dance. They were food for many and predators of the smaller still, nibbling at plankton, shrimp, and each other. They were the pulse of the ocean, countless, tireless, filling the space between giant and microscopic life too, filled Panthalassa. Plankton drifted in clouds, invisible to the naked eye, but foundational to everything above. They fed the ammonites, the fish, the filter feeders. Without them, the ocean would starve. Their presence was a reminder that ecosystems are not built only on the spectacular, but on the unseen. The ichthyosaurs sprint, the ammonites spiral, the reefs bustle. All of it floated on the quiet persistence of tiny drifters carried by currents. The interactions of this marine world were endless. A ray-finned fish snaps up plankton, an ammonite seizes the fish, an ichthyosaur devours the ammonite, and then the ichthyosaur itself, injured or old, sinks at last to the seafloor, its body becoming food for crabs, worms, and scavengers. Nothing was wasted. The ocean recycled endlessly, turning death into life, feeding growth with decay. And yet, despite this cycle, there was humor in abundance. Imagine an ammonite drifting serenely, only to be bumped by another ammonite, spiraling the wrong way, like two traffic-confused snails colliding mid-current, or a small ichthyosaur misjudging its leap, lunging at a fish only to snap its jaws on empty water and spin awkwardly, glaring as if embarrassed. Even reefs had their comedy, crabs clambering over one another, fish darting in and out of holes like children in a game. The Triassic Ocean was not solemn, it was lively, bustling, and sometimes clumsy. The warmth of the Panthalassan waters shaped everything. Without ice at the poles, currents flowed differently, mixing nutrients and heat across vast distances. The shallow seas near coasts became fertile grounds, supporting dense reefs and swarms of life. Deeper waters remained mysterious, darker, quieter, their inhabitants still hidden from us in fossil shadows. But in the sunlit shallows, life flourished with determination, improvising new forms and roles. If you could drift there, suspended in the gentle sway of Panthalassa, you would see a world of light and motion. Schools of fish shimmer like mirrors, ammonites spiral upward in slow dances, ichthyosaurs slice past, eyes gleaming, tails rippling. The reef below murmurs with industry, its inhabitants scurrying and nibbling, snapping and hiding. Above, the surface sparkles like a ceiling of broken glass, and beyond, the horizon stretches unbroken, the ocean as infinite as sky. This was the Triassic Sea. Not yet the reef cities of the Cretaceous, not yet the whale-filled oceans of the Cenozoic, but already alive, already rich, already beautiful. It was a reminder that the ocean, more than land, has always been Earth's first and greatest cradle, and if the Earth itself could speak of Panthalassa, it might whisper with delight, "Swim, little ones. My waters are wide, my reefs are busy, my hunters are swift. This is your kingdom, vast and alive." The ichthyosaurs swam, the ammonites spiraled, the reefs built, the fish darted, and together they made a world that thrived beneath the Triassic sun. It was a marine ecosystem at once delicate and resilient, a vast and shimmering stage upon which life rehearsed its possibilities, preparing for the symphonies yet to come. And so our journey through the Triassic draws to a close. We have wandered across deserts where life clung fiercely to survival, moved through sparse forests and swampy lowlands, and drifted in the warm seas of Panthalassa, where ammonites spiraled and ichthyosaurs glided like ancient dolphins. We have watched the Earth itself heal and reimagine life after the greatest extinction it had ever faced. From the vast continent of Pangaea to the relentless sun and shifting ecosystems, the Triassic was a crucible, a place of trial, yes, but also of renewal. Most of all, we have seen how this age became the foundation of something extraordinary, from the small, nimble archosaurs who first stood tall on their hind limbs, to the pioneering predators who tested new strategies, to the first true giants who reached skyward for green leaves. This was where the story of dinosaurs began. Herrerasaurus with its quick, decisive jaws, Caulophysis darting swift as desert wind, Plateosaurus swaying gentle and enormous among the ferns. All of them were part of a single great overture, a prelude to the symphony that would follow. The Triassic was not yet the age of thunderous herds or colossal predators. It was quieter, leaner, harsher, but in that very harshness lay its gift. It demanded innovation, and life responded. It asked for resilience, and life endured. It tested small beginnings, and from those beginnings grew a dynasty that would dominate Earth for over 160 million years. When we think of the age of dinosaurs, we imagine the giants of the Jurassic and Cretaceous, the towering sauropods, the armored stegosaurs, the swift raptors, and the mighty tyrannosaurs. Yet all of them walked on a path, first laid in the Triassic. Without these early experiments, without this crucible of survival, there would have been no golden age of dinosaurs. The Triassic was the spark, the first breath, the fragile but unstoppable beginning of a story that still captures our imaginations today. And perhaps that is why this ancient chapter still matters. It is not only a story of creatures long vanished, it is a reminder of how resilience is born, how greatness often begins in quiet, humble steps. The Triassic whispers to us that from deserts can rise forests, from small hunters can rise empires, from hardship can rise wonder. So, as you rest now, let your thoughts drift back across those millions of years. Imagine the warm winds across Pangaea, the shimmer of sunlight over Panthalassa, the quiet sound of footsteps in ancient sand. Picture the first dinosaurs, small and determined, carrying the promise of the future in every stride. The Triassic was their dawn, and in its light a new world began. What do you think of this ancient beginning? I invite you to share your reflections, to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this journey. And now, as the Earth itself would whisper, let go of the day. Close your eyes and sleep well. Dream of deserts and forests, of ammonites spiraling and dinosaurs taking their first steps. Dream of the Triassic, the dawn of the dinosaur age. Good night.